To God be the glory, great things he has done. So loved him the world that he gave us his son, who yielded his life and atonement for sin, and opened the life gate that all may go in.
Thanks for tuning in to No Trash, Just Truth, a podcast of Proverbs 910 Ministries.
With your hosts, Chris Paxson and Rose Spiller. Be sure to check out our other podcast, 5 a.m. Theology, available on all platforms.
And give him the glory, great things he has done.
Welcome back. Rose, we both have experience with the subject of today's episode, because today's episode is about the Amish. I've lived in Amish country my entire life. And you did too when you lived in Pennsylvania. And I'm guessing that you probably still have some Amish around you in Indiana?
Yeah, you do see some.
Well, today we're going to answer questions like, are those TV shows about the Amish true? Is there an Amish mafia? And other than my husband John and I, who are team named Amish Mafia when we play trivia together. If you visited Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and you visit an Amish village and take a ride in a buggy or visit one of those vast number of Amish-style restaurants, is that really what their lives and their food is like? You can take any number of driving tours through the countryside, see their farms, learn a little bit about their culture, but are those tours showing you the real deal?
And Chris, it all looks very quaint and beautiful in pictures and even in the tourist areas. But is it really? We're going to talk about what it's really like. Now, people flock to see these quaint, quiet, religious people living their lives in an old-fashioned way. A lot of times they're disrespectful of their beliefs and stuff, but they are extremely different from the rest of the world. But is what you're seeing the whole story, or are you just getting shown a picture through rose-colored glasses? Is there a bad, maybe even a dark side of Amish culture that most visitors and most tourists or people who read books about them never get to see? And the most important question, are they Christian? Because they'll tell you they are. Some have called the Amish a cult. Like I said, they don't. They consider themselves Christian. Is it? Is it true that they're a cult, or is that just a bad label they got? So, Chris, let's dive in, and we probably should start with some history.
The Amish are known as Anabaptists. If you listen to episode 271 of The Nail Heard Round the World from our series on church history, then you probably already know that the Amish got their start during the Protestant Reformation. They were part of the Reformation happenings in Switzerland under the leadership of Swiss reformer Ulrich Zwingli. Zwingli's stand against the Roman Catholic Church resulted in even further and more zealous calls for reformation by some others.
Two of the more zealous reformers were Conrad Grebel and Felix Manz, and they led a Bible study, and they began advocating not only the same reforms as Zwingli was advocating, but they also took a radical turn from the practice of infant baptism, and they called for adult baptism instead. Now, instead of agreeing with them like they thought he would, Zwingli completely disagreed with their views on baptism. He called them re-baptizers and later derisively calling them Anabaptists.
Yeah, that's how they got the name. Zwingli denied the Roman Catholics' claim that baptism washes away sin, but he still advocated for infant baptism, taking a covenantal view of it. Zwingli claimed that adult baptism of someone who had already been baptized as an infant, like those Bible study leaders were calling for, was not only pointless, but it was an affront to God. The City Council of Zurich made it illegal for anyone to refuse to have their babies baptized, and later they made adult baptism illegal too. The Bible study group led by Grebel and Manz refused to adhere to Zwingli's teaching and likewise to those mandates from the city. And on January 21, 1525, they openly performed adult baptisms at Felix Manz's house and encouraged people to refuse to have their infants baptized.
And crazy as this sounds, they were both capital offenses. So the men fled the city. Mans was found. He was put on trial. And on January 5th, 1527, they bound him hand and foot and gave him one final baptism when they drowned him in the Lamont River. Now, Conrad Grebel escaped and he continued to preach and teach on the need for radical reform from the Catholic Church. But he also preached and wrote against infant baptism. He died in 1526, most likely from the plague. His work against infant baptism and advocating for adult baptism earned him the title the father of the Anabaptists. The beliefs held by him and the other Swiss brethren who were dubbed Anabaptists is what led the Anabaptist groups that we know today as the Mennonite and the Amish.
The Mennonites were named after an early leader who was a converted Catholic priest named Menno Simons, were founded in the 1530s. The Amish emerged from them following a man named Jacob Ammon, who disagreed with the practices of the Mennonite brethren. He said that they had become too permissive.
Now, both groups advocated for adult baptism. They advocated for nonviolence, pacifism. They rejected military service. They adhered to a literal interpretation of the Bible. They rejected worldly pleasure in favor of spiritual values, and they had a few other things in common. But there were differences. One main point was that Jacob Ammon and his followers believed in a more strict interpretation of the doctrine of shunning, or social avoidance, as it's called. The differences in the followers of Jacob Ammon from those who followed Menno Simons became more apparent, and in 1693, the Amish formally separated from the Mennonites to become their own sect.
By this time, many were living in Germany or Alsace, France, not just Switzerland. In the 1700s, many migrated to North America, prompted by William Penn's promise of religious freedom. That doesn't mean that they didn't meet with hostility when they got here. There's a historical marker for the first Amish settlement called Northkill, and it was established around 1740. It was originally located in what was considered Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, but that land's now part of Berks County, which was established later.
Northkill was located on the edge of the legal boundary of a European settlement, according to an agreement that they made with Native Americans. But during the French and Indian War, Native Americans from the Lenape and the Shawnee tribes attacked the Amish settlement in retaliation for encroachment on their lands. They set the home of Amishman Jacob Hochstetter on fire, and they guarded the house so the family couldn't escape. Because of the Amish pacifist beliefs of non-resistance, Jacob wouldn't allow his sons to use their guns to fight back. They were only allowed to use them for hunting animals. Now, most of the family escaped the fire through a basement window, but Jacob's wife, Anna, got stuck in the window during her escape, and later she was stabbed in the back and scalped. Jacob and his sons, Joseph and Christian, were taken captive. 2 others were killed after they escaped.
So that's the history of how they came to America. Let's dive in to answer some of those popular questions that we talked about that people have about the Amish. Probably most of our listeners have heard of that show, Amish Mafia. So is there one? Well, the church claims there's not. But the show claims that it's all based on true events that happened. So let's face it. I mean, so no surprise, the show is probably out for ratings.
And how many of those reality shows have any base in reality anyway?
I know. And this show did not even get the name of the police right. They called them in the show the Lancaster County Police Department. And the actual Lancaster City Police Department put out a name clarification. So I wouldn't put too much stock in what the TV show people are saying. Here's another question. Do the Amish use doctors? Yes, the Amish use the same doctors and hospitals that we do. Do the Amish borrow and lend solely from inside their communities? That's a big theory out here. But the answer is no, they don't. They use the same banks to save and to borrow, just like we do. They may do some borrowing and lending from, inside their own ranks, but not exclusively.
Chris, when I lived down in Lancaster County, I had a friend who worked for a bank. She was pretty high up. Her whole department was just to deal with Amish, to lend to them, help them with their banking. So it was a whole department in a chain bank in Lancaster County. So they were big banking customers.
They definitely are. And that leads to the next question. Are they wealthy? Well, some are and others are not, just like anybody else, any other group of people. And Rose, that can really be seen in the fanciness or the non-fanciness of their farms. I don't know if anybody listening follows me on Facebook. I'm sure some of you do. But my friend for my 60th birthday took me out on a tour. It was in these small little cars. You could go on a tour of Lancaster County, and we stopped at some Amish places. Well, we were about an hour and a half north of where I live, and those farms were fancy dancy. They were so fancy. I mean, there was not only was it nice and tidy, which most of them are down here too, but they were actually fancy. Like the railings were fancy, the stonework was fancy, they were fancy.
And on the other end, Chris, about a half a mile from where we lived when I was near you, there was an Amish family. They had 9 kids and they lived in a trailer.
Yep, and that's not really uncommon around here. So there seems to be every level of income in their community, and sometimes, Rose, it's seen in their properties, not necessarily just because they have a trailer, but sometimes the way they take care of their properties.
Absolutely. Just like with any development or any neighborhood around here, you know the people that aren't taking care of their stuff, and the Amish know it. And the ones who are really diligent about their homes and their businesses and their farms, the way they appear, they don't like the ones that are really messy any more than we like messy people in our neighborhoods. Just like we kind of talk, oh, there's the neighbor, the hoarder, who has a mess on their porch. The Amish have names within their own circles for each category. Their messy counterparts, the ones who don't take care of their place and they're kind of messy, they call them dirty Amish.
Yes, they do.
Chris, another misconception is that they don't pay taxes, but they do pay taxes. Again, my daughter-in-law worked for a company who just did Amish tax returns, and it was a huge business. So yes, they pay taxes. Now, they don't pay Social Security because they've opted out of that. They don't put any money into it, and they don't ever draw from it either. So they're not doing anything unscrupulous. Here's something else. How about all these tourist attractions set up like Amish farms? Now, if you don't live in where there's Amish, you might not even ever have seen these. But if you know anything about Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and I'm sure in Ohio and Missouri, where there's other big populations, they have them too. But in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, Amish tourist farms and other things and buggy rides is big business. But Chris, are they realistic?
I don't know. I've never been to one. Have you, Rose?
I have not been the one because I lived in the middle of them, so I didn't see any reason to spend money to go see them. But I watched a documentary, and they were actually in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, visiting them, and they said they're all run by ex-Amish. So these guys don't agree with the Amish lifestyle and leave, but then they're profiting off the Amish lifestyle. So
Right.
there's probably some realistic stuff since they were once Amish, but like everything else, it's a tourist attraction.
Exactly.
There's probably no messy Amish.
Probably not. Not on the touristy
Not
Amish
on the
farms.
tours, no. And Chris, as you know, you can drive anywhere in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Besides these farms and other buggy rides, there's restaurants advertising Amish homestyle cooking. And actually, I've seen one of these in Indiana. It said Amish cooking. We have a market and cooking, and they all say it's Amish. Now, when we lived there, there was this little gem of a place in a little neighborhood, and it was called Hometown. And it was run by Amish. Amish women cooked, and most of their clientele were Amish. But we would go there all the time because the food was just fabulous.
Yeah, and I've eaten there with you, and the food is very, very good, and the baked goods are very, very good.
Yes.
But what you get at one of those restaurants might not be what you would get at the dinner table if you were Amish tonight. Rose, I remember when my uncle died, their Amish neighbors brought food for the family, like a hot meal. And it was not like anything we had ever tasted before. And just a couple other things. Like I bought Amish root beer one time, and have heard other people say the same thing about it. It is totally different than our soda. It is flat and it's not very sweet.
Hmm.
And I had a friend, this is a long time ago, but she went and she made ketchup with the Amish. They were going to make it and can it. And she took her kids down there because she was homeschooling and thought this would be a good experience. And I'm sure in many ways it was. But when she tried the ketchup, she said it was terrible. It wasn't anything like our ketchup. Now, if you go to hometown where we were talking about before, you're going to get regular ketchup for
Yeah.
your fries. So with my experiences with some of these, homemade baked foods and homemade dinner food and stuff that I've experienced and some of the things I've heard other people say, I wonder sometimes if Amish food, even if it's cooked by Amish, is not like Chinese or some other ethnic food where they kind of Americanize it for what we will like better than maybe what they would make at home that they're used to. I mean, or
Well, Chris, just
maybe
because I'm 100% Italian, what you get in an Italian restaurant, I'm not making ossobuco every night or carbonara. I mean,
true. That's true. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how it is living around the Amish. Are they kind and caring neighbors, or are they thorns in the side when you live next to them?
well, if you're listening, you probably have heard something about the Nickel Mines Amish school shooting, which happened back in 2006. Ironically, Chris, the shooter and his wife lived across the street from Hometown, that little restaurant I mentioned. 6 Amish girls were killed after returning from recess, and it was a terrible event. It was all over the national news. They showed the standoff because the police were there trying to get him to come out and release the girls. The Amish became known from that. They even made a movie about it for their Christ-like forgiveness and their sense of community because that day, parents of one of the girls who were killed went to see the shooter who was killed by the police. They went to see his wife to see how she was. And Chris, you and I have met her. And she talks about how that whole day and what a horrible thing happened and how she didn't understand, didn't know her husband was going to do it and how the Amish came and forgave her and kept coming to her. And she talks about just the horribleness of the event, but she talks about just the grace of the Amish and, that they gave her, even
Exactly.
families of the girls who were killed. And Chris, another more recent thing that's been all over the news. In September 2024, when Hurricane Helene hit North Carolina and completely devastated parts of it, the Amish didn't waste any time. They came from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, some of them, and other areas, other parts of the country. And they went and they knocked out 150 homes in like record time and built them all for people because people were living out in tents and outside and it was starting to get cold. And they went and just knocked out these houses and it was unbelievable. They just finished building the last one this past September. So they've been at it, but they would go in shifts and it was really an amazing thing to see.
It was an amazing thing to see. And many of the Amish exhibit Christ like qualities in their interactions with others. They were great to my aged parents when they lived near them. During the Christmas season, the local schoolhouse and some of the adults would come and they would carol to them in their house, and they did that for other neighbors too. Like I said, they brought food not only to my uncle, but like to our house when our parents died, and whenever there was a death in the family. One of my mom's very good friends was Amish, lovely lady. I went to her house, it was lovely. When we were selling my parents' house and their furnishings after they both passed away, they were so kind and comforting and they expressed their condolences. Some even came to the funeral service at the Presbyterian church where my parents went. And I don't even know if that's allowed according to their ordnung, but they did. And we're going to talk about this later, but I know they heard the gospel there both times very clearly. And I'm glad they were there.
Yeah, that is pretty amazing that they went. But as with everything, and Chris, as you and I both know from being in the thick of it, everything Amish is not all good. They've been exposed for running puppy mills where dogs have been found living in terrible conditions, major health problems of the dogs, all for the sake of making money. Their buggies can be a hazard on the road. If you live in that area, especially Sundays, they're all over the place. Buggy drivers are often inexperienced or very young. They have these things called pony carts that a pony pulls a little wagon, and you see these 6-year-old kids on these windy roads and hills on these pony carts, and in an SUV, you'd never see them.
Nope.
Horses can be unpredictable, easily spooked, or just plain uncontrollable. Chris, my son's had to pull over because 2 young Amish girls lost control of their horse and the horse took off and he had to go help them get it.
Yeah, I remember we were coming home from church one day and we had the boys and one of their friends were with us and they were about 9 or 10. And there was an electric fence there and the Amish buggy, the horse just decided he wanted to go into the field and right over the fence. And we did the same thing. We had to stop and help them. And thankfully nobody, including the horse, was hurt. But yeah, it can be a danger.
Yeah, it really can. The quaintness of buggies wears off when you're dealing with them every day on the road.
Yeah.
And speaking of the buggies, the wheels on them are steel. They're not rubber. They're not like tires or anything. And especially on the tractors, they do a lot of damage to the roads. And in most states, they don't pay registration or anything. So they're not paying anything into the roads. And you can literally see the ruts in the road from the steel wheels if in Amish areas.
Yeah, if you get your tire in it, it's not good.
No. Now, some states have taken them to court about it. And there are some Amish and Mennonite communities who've set aside a small fund to cover the road damage from their steel wheels. Now, around where we lived, where you live, and I used to, the Mennonites, for the most part, drive cars. They're all black, but they drive cars, and they don't really drive buggies anymore.
Here's another thing. The Amish refer to those of us who are not Amish as the English, not because we're from England, but that's what they call us. And that term dates back to colonial times. And what it means is, quote unquote, the high people. The Amish consider themselves the plain people, or sometimes I think they say it plainy lut. Well, if somebody leaves the Amish community and joins mainstream American culture, they say so-and-so has gone huck. To be considered huck by the Amish is not a compliment. And to be honest, the sentiment is felt by the quote-unquote English people that live around them. Not all the time, but the feeling is definitely there. And I'll give you an example. One example is that often there's really little or no regard for how their farming practices, among other things, affect the lives of the quote-unquote English. We experience it big time in the smell of manure that permeates everything, your house, your car, your clothes, your hair. It's just spread whenever they want to, as much as they want to, for as many days as they want to. And they don't turn it under. So it just lays on the top of the ground and continues to smell. And there are times if you had a planned party, you couldn't have it.
That's right. And in that area, most of the time, you're talking there's wells and septic tanks. We had Amish farms around us. Our place was on a little bit of an incline. We had a well, and we had to get a huge reverse osmosis system and water filtration and all this other stuff because of the manure and which is basically fertilizer. It was so high in the water, you couldn't drink it.
Right.
You couldn't even use it to cook because it was so high.
Yeah, I know what you mean. A lot of people in the area have something like that. Another thing that we've had problems with ourselves is they'll just indiscriminately cut down trees or, clear some land, and they don't really ask you like, hey, I think this might be on my side of the line, or, do you think it's on yours? They don't even ask. They just do it. It's really just to get like another couple feet of farmland, and you're like, what are you doing? And so you just live and learn. You learn to watch, when you hear a chainsaw out there or something like that. And so for these reasons, the quote unquote English that live around them do have some difficulty with them.
Well, it was kind of ironic that those first Amish settlers were killed by the Indians for encroaching on their land,
Yeah.
because that was something that we dealt with. We had a good bit of land when we lived out there. And every year you could see the Amish guy next to us, his farm was moving over onto our land. And we had a couple trees, so we knew where the line was. And he kept moving it over every year, farther and farther onto our
Yeah.
land. So yeah,
Yeah.
you're right.
So there are issues. Yeah.
Yeah. And on the flip side, if some of the Amish think what the English are doing is bad, they don't have a lot of tolerance for it. They'll badger a venue that's legally operating and allowed to have music to stop the music or to have it turned way down. They'll petition the local municipality to get what they want, to get exceptions to things like housing rules. EPA, they get exceptions to that quote unquote English farms don't have. And they have a lot of political clout. They're known to get approval for things that the English in the area have a harder time getting. Like I said, the EPA will dog American farms, or English farms, and they'll just ignore what Amish farms are doing. And that causes some animosity. And I think the reason behind it that I was told once is they're so afraid the Amish will leave the community because of how much money they bring in, with all the tourists and stuff, that they do whatever they want so they don't leave.
That's what I've always heard too, and kind of seems true. Like I said, I don't hate living here. I don't think you hated living
No,
here.
not
And
at all. I
I'm
loved living there.
I'm thankful for all the good things, the fresh produce, the fresh flowers, the fact that we do live around a lot of farmland rather than developments. But it's not all rose-colored,
No,
glasses. It's not all great all the time.
no,
And yes, there's many, many lovely, wonderful Amish, but there are also those who really just they're going to do whatever they want to do,
yeah.
and so be it. So,
And it's kind of funny that sometimes they think the music's too loud or something, because Sunday nights they have their little teenage hymn sings, and we had many times where they come home 2, 3 in the morning, drunk, singing loudly. I mean, it didn't bother us, but it would certainly wake us up.
right, yeah, you hear the horse going by and hear him singing and stuff like that. It's
Yes.
just normal, and like I said, but
I remember an Amish young guy who was a good friend of my husband's. He said that they get drunk at those things. That's what they do. And he said they just count on the horse finding their way home. 'Cause
I thought cows could find their way home, but I didn't know that horses could.
apparently the horses can too.
Good thing.
So even with all that clout that they have, the political clout, they're not allowed to run for political office themselves, but they have a large voting body. So they have a lot of sway, whether locally or even nationally. Recently, you probably have heard the Amish were instrumental in getting President Trump to win Pennsylvania.
Yeah, we follow a guy named Scott Pressler on social media, and he's a committed Republican who's been hustling, canvassing for years now to get people registered Republican, and that's happened over the last few elections. And he's been instrumental in reaching out to the Amish to do that too. Historically, the Amish participation in elections has noticeably occurred just a few times, like you said, with President Trump in 1896, when President Republican nominee William McKinley was running and he was campaigning for the industries, and the Amish, they aligned with the Democrat because he had policies that advocated for small farmers. They made a difference in the 1960 presidential election between Republican Richard Nixon and Democrat John Kennedy. The Amish viewed Kennedy as an ally of the Catholic Church, which he was because he was Catholic, and they viewed him and the Catholic Church as intolerant. So they supported Nixon, who was a Quaker, and they made a difference in both presidential elections for George W. Bush.
Yeah, the Amish will cast their votes on the basis of morality and also what's going to be favorable to them, not unlike the rest of us. They've gone to court to have wastewater management standards changed. They've gotten child labor laws lessened so their children could work in the family business. And in December 2021, Ohio Republican Bob Gibbs introduced legislation to allow people with specific religious beliefs, such as the Amish, to be exempt from a requirement of possessing identification documents featuring their photographs in order to purchase a firearm from a federally licensed firearms dealer. Now, as many of you may know, the Amish feel getting their picture taken or having any photographs of people is a form of idolatry. So you can see why they would want this law to be changed.
Exactly. So what we're saying with saying all that is the Amish are not a group of backwards people who are out of the loop and have nothing to do with what's being legislated. They're very, very aware, as they should be, as we all should be. So do you see these quaint people out running their farm, using horses? They know what's going on in the world. They're not out of the loop.
Sometimes more than the rest of us.
Sometimes more than the rest of us. All right, so enough about their politics. Let's talk about their rules and their lifestyle.
Well, they are an exclusive, tight-knit community. And although they are often friends with English people, as they call them, and neighbors, they are a very tight-knit community. And the church dictates what may and may not be done. They adhere to rules called the Ordnung. You mentioned it earlier, Chris. That's a German word meaning order or discipline. Now, the rules found in the Ordnung are not taken directly from the Bible. They're based on Amish interpretation. The Ordnung has undergone changes over time. Initially, it was established to maintain a strict separation from modern society and uphold traditional values. It was designed to maintain the distinctiveness of the Amish way of life and preserve their culture and their traditions. In order to keep the community cohesive, everyone follows the same guidelines. That's the principle. So this is why some have called the Amish a cult, something that we're going to talk more about in the next episode, which is part 2 of this series on Amish.
The Ordnung can vary from one Old Order Amish church district to another. A lot of people believe that the Amish bishop of each district imposes and enforces the rules that he deems important, but his main power is in determining which issues will actually come up for a vote. The bishop can refuse to undertake the consideration of something, or he can choose to temporarily allow certain things like technologies to see what happens for a time and then bring it to a vote, but he doesn't make the rules all by himself. And if the community feels strong enough about an issue, the bishop can come under a lot of pressure to do what the group wants or at least bring it to a vote.
The Amish hold what they call a council meeting twice a year, and the purpose of that is to review the Ordnung before holding a communion service. During the council meeting, which takes place 2 weeks before communion, the Ordnung is reviewed and members are asked for their concurrence. A congregation must be in unity over the Ordnung, and outstanding issues have to be addressed in order for communion to take place. Changes to the Ordnung are often hotly debated within the Amish communities, and they can result sometimes in divisions or even splinter different groups. Some of the things the Old Order Amish Ordnung prohibits are getting electricity from the public power grid, suing in a court of law, meaning suing another person, owning certain technology such as cars or televisions. They prohibit divorce, and like we said earlier, they prohibit running for political office.
The Ordnung dictates just about everything in Amish life, including men and women's roles, the style and cut of clothing each can wear. It stipulates that the men are the head of the households and the older men are the elders in the community. Amish men are required to work and support their families and be faithful to their wives. They're required to live modestly. Some of their Ordnung rules are derived from the Old Testament. For instance, men growing long beards after they're married. That follows Leviticus 19:27, which says, "You shall not round the corners of your heads, neither shall you mar the corners of your beard." They wear wide-brimmed black hats paired with dark suits, plain shirts, and suspenders.
Now, the Amish woman's main requirement is to maintain their house, care for their families, and be faithful to their husbands. Amish women dress modestly with plain, simple dresses that also come from an interpretation of the Bible's teaching about modesty. All Amish women must follow the rules regardless of their age or marital status. The plain, simple dress is required as a sign of separation from the vanity of modern living. Now, the women wear plain colored dresses that cover them completely, and they wear an apron on top of it and capes as their outer garments when the weather gets cold. And Chris, if you live around Mennonites and Amish, a big difference is the Mennonites are allowed little flowers on their dresses, but Amish are always one solid color.
Yes. Amish women have long hair, but it must be pulled back very tightly and hidden underneath their bonnet or cap when they're in public. That's because it's supposed to only be seen by their husbands and they're not to draw attention to themselves. They do not cut or style or dye their hair, and they never wear makeup or jewelry. If they did it, they would be considered worldly and as if they were trying to draw attention to themselves, and they're supposed to be humble. So that's why they follow all these rules.
The Ordnung dictates that women start wearing head coverings beginning around the age of 12. Based on 1 Corinthians 11, they wear them as a sign of submission to their husbands or their fathers when they're not yet married. And for another reason, in order to always be ready to pray, like we said, in accordance with 1 Corinthians 11, it's particularly verse 5, which says, any woman who prays or prophesies with her head unveiled brings shame upon her head.
And when you look at their attire, you might notice that there's an absence of buttons on them. Aside from the men's shirts, which sometimes have buttons, but not all the time, Amish vests and coats are fastened with hooks and eyes, and women's dresses are fastened with either pins, which are often straight pins that has to like poke you every once in a while, or else they have snaps. So what do the Amish have against buttons? Well, buttons are considered to be decorative items, so they're seen as a symbol of vanity and individuality. So no buttons.
How about zippers? Well, you're not likely to encounter zippers on Amish clothing either. And the reasoning behind this is kind of funny. Their reasoning is tied to a belief in Gelassenheit, which is a German term that Cambridge Dictionary translates to calmness and composure. And it corresponds to a slow and steady pace of life. And zippers are the antithesis of Gelassenheit because they encourage quickness and convenience over a more slower paced lifestyle. I never thought of my zipper as speeding up my life, but
think of it this way, Rose. You know those 501 Levi jeans that had the like 5-button fly?
oh yeah, the button fly.
Well,
There you
they
go.
don't use buttons either, but if you had to pin your jeans shut instead of
Ugh.
zippering them, it would take a while.
Yeah.
All right, so what are some other rules of the Old Order Amish Ordnung? Well, you might think that alcohol and tobacco use is forbidden, but neither is. And some Old Order Amish do partake, both men and women. A lot of them around my area and where you were when you lived here, Rose, grow broadleaf tobacco, which is great for the outside of a cigar, the wrapper of it. But it's not so great for the inside. However, most of the tobacco goes to other countries, but some Amish keep some for themselves, dry it, and then make their own cigars. Now, they can go out and buy them, but, sometimes that's what they do with their tobacco that they grow. Likewise, some make their own beer or wine or other spirits, but they don't have to. They can also go out and buy those things too, just like we do.
When it comes to technology, some things are permitted in certain circumstances. The Amish can't drive cars, but they can ride in them as passengers. And you'll often see people driving around. I knew people who made a living just driving the Amish.
Oh, it's huge money.
Yeah,
Huge money
because
maker.
sometimes they want to go far
Yeah.
and they'll pay for it. And they pay well and they pay in cash.
Yep.
Now, when it comes to business, the Amish can use a computer and a telephone, but not at home for their personal use. Cabinetry and stuff like that and woodworking is huge in the Amish community. So you'll see big wood shops, and a lot of times they have cell phones in there or even landlines. Some Amish have cell phones. It's usually the men because they're working. But it is common to see a tiny shed located somewhere on the property, usually far away from the house, and it looks like a little outhouse, but it's actually where a telephone is.
The Amish main mode of transportation is the horse-drawn buggy, and use of horse-drawn transportation is seen as a way to avoid the temptations and distractions of modern technology and show their separation from the world. And it helps to keep their community together. It's looked at as a humble way to go. Around Lancaster County, we usually see charcoal colored buggies, but there's actually 5 main colors, and you can see most of these in different parts of Pennsylvania. And I think I've probably seen all of them. Black, brown, gray, white, and various shades of yellow, everything from butter yellow to bright yellow.
Yeah, we saw the bright yellow in Ohio when we were traveling. A new Amish buggy can cost anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000. And basically, it has a bench seat that runs along the sides of the buggy with a driver's seat in the front and a passenger seat in the back. It's kind of like in golf carts, you see that passenger seat in the back. A lot of the buggies have that.
Yep.
The seats are usually made of wood or metal, and they're often covered with cloth or leather. Now, the buggy has a roof to protect passengers from the elements, but comfort is not a factor when they've made buggies, especially with the big families and they pile into them. I can't imagine how uncomfortable it probably is. Now, there are some that have storm fronts, which is kind of akin to a windshield, and it makes them warmer and drier. But not all Amish churches let you have this feature. And if you live around them, you'll see in the dead of winter, these poor people are out in these buggies. Like
Yep.
we said earlier, they have steel wheels, not pneumatic rubber filled with air. So those steel wheels, besides destroying the road, make you feel every single pebble on the road. I don't think we realize how much rubber tires absorb things on the road.
I don't think so either, Rose. And the same's true of their tractors, which I think you mentioned earlier. Many Amish do use like mules and horses to pull their plows and stuff, but sometimes they use tractors or other large equipment, and those tractors have steel wheels. Why? Well, for the same reason that the buggies, to make it too uncomfortable for them to even consider getting on the tractor and going to church with their family or, anything like that. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. If they had tires filled with air on those tractors, it might be too tempting to go hop on the tractor and go to the neighbor's farm for what you need rather than, a horse and buggy.
We mentioned that the Ordnung forbids connecting to the public power grid. You're not going to see electric lines running from the street to the house. In fact, a lot of times if they buy a house that belonged to an English, first thing they do is disconnect the wires that are coming in.
I think they have 6 months.
Okay. They don't usually rip the stuff out. They just disconnect it from the house, from the pole. But that doesn't mean that they don't have many of the same appliances that you and I do. I think sometimes people think they live by candlelight,
I
like they
think
would
some
have
people,
done 200 years ago.
yeah, it's not like that at all, but that is what people think.
Yeah. Now, they don't have televisions, but they do have refrigerators and stoves and washing machines, electric irons, lighting, and other modern appliances. And now, given all that, most of the Amish do hang their wash out to dry. And again, sometimes in the dead of winter, you'll see the clothes hanging out.
Rain, snow, sunshine, you could possibly see Amish laundry hanging out on a
Yes.
big line. And I like to hang my wash out too when they're not spreading manure, but yeah, not always in the dead of winter because most of the time it's frozen.
Yeah, I'll save that for spring and summer.
Yes. All right, so how do they power those appliances that you mentioned, Rose? Well, sometimes you'll see a windmill or a solar panel for something small, but most Amish use propane, natural gas, diesel generators, or batteries for power. And if you drive by many Amish farms, you'll usually see a huge propane or natural gas tank.
Right. And they use it for heat too. I mean, it's not like they're only using a wood fireplace for heat. They do have heat in their homes.
Yep.
The old order Amish Ordnung doesn't have a fixed number of rules, and not every local district has the same rules. There's some flexibility within the rules. And another interesting thing about the Ordnung is that it's largely passed down through oral tradition. Now, that's not always true, but sometimes it is. Sometimes the Ordnung is written out, and it depends on the number of rules and detail of each rule. One ordinung might be 2 pages long, another one might be 18 or more. Sometimes all church members have a copy, but not always.
You can kind of make up your own things when you don't have actually spelled out rules, but we're going to say more about the Ordnung and its rules next week. But for now, this is a good place to end. And so we hope that you'll join us next week when we talk about the Amish family life, Rumspringa, shunning, and examine whether or not the Amish are Christians or whether they might actually be a cult.
Have a blessed day, everyone.
And give him the glory, great things he has done.